Welcome to the Dawn Society, and this afternoon I have a very special guest, Gerard Aartsen, who's come to give a talk on UFOs and the spiritual transformation of the Earth, and UFOs here to help. And Gerard has come from Amsterdam, where he is a lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences, where he works in the teacher training department, and he's also a co-worker with Share International, where he translates the magazine from English to Dutch. He's also an author, a researcher, and has written 2 books, which he has here: George Adamski, A Herald for the Space Brothers, and Space Brothers, Here to Help UFOs and the Space Brothers. And he's spoken at other theosophical groups here in England and London, and also in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and he's also spoken at UFO conferences. I saw him last year at the Ex-Politics conference in Leeds. So I'm truly welcome Gerard Aartsen. Thank
you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for having me.
I'll just say about the questions. Gerard said you'd like to ask the questions after.
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thanks. Yes, I'm very happy that you invited me over and allow me to share the story here that I have uncovered over the last couple of years when my own interest in the topic started in earnest. When I found out more about George Adamski, who was one of the very early contactees, as they are called, people who have been contacted by people from space in order to pass on information that the brothers and sisters from space, as they would like to be known, want us to be aware of. Before going into George Adamski a bit more, let me give you a little bit of the background to the extraterrestrial presence. They, as they are called, have always been here. And there are several references to extraterrestrials, craft and people in ancient scriptures, the Indian Vedas and the Old Testament of the Bible. And here is a nice physical piece of evidence. This is a cave painting that was found, I suppose, sometime in 2009, early 2010. That was reported on in the Rajasthan Times from India. And it depicts obviously a person in a spacesuit and a flying saucer in the background. And that reminds me, I'll just get out my laser pen from my bag so I can point out. Here we are. When I need to point things out, there we go. There's the spaceship. So there's been records of an extraterrestrial presence on Earth throughout our known history. The modern interest in UFOs, as they are known now, of course, literally UFO means unidentified flying object, and that could be anything from an unidentified weather balloon to an unidentified light phenomenon due to swamp gas. And those are the explanations that scientists and the media would prefer us to follow for everything, even if we have seen a solid craft in the sky that is clearly not man-made. But the term UFOs is now generic. In the 1950s, they were referred to as flying saucers, but they take all kinds of shapes and forms, including pyramids. And here we see an artist's rendition of the type of craft that Kenneth Arnold noticed when he was flying over Washington State, Mount Rainier in the United States. On the 24th of June 1947, he was a business pilot, small airline company. He was trained as a pilot, so he knew very well the difference between a regular aircraft or perhaps an advanced aircraft and something that he'd never seen. And here he shows an artist rendition. He didn't have a camera with him, and perhaps it was too dangerous as well if he would have had a camera on him, trying to make photographs as he was flying his small business aircraft. His sighting made the world news and was soon followed by another sighting by pilots on United Airlines Flight 105 in early July 1947. Less than a month later, a few weeks later, which also made the headlines, especially in the United States. There was a huge frenzy among the people around the world about these unknown crafts. We had heard reports about strange lights that were following fighter jets during the Second World War over Europe. But apparently, from what I've seen and heard, they were not typically seen as craft. This time they were seen as craft, as discs, as crescents, and they were really grabbing people's attention. Even more so when one of those mysterious craft crashed over or near Roswell in New Mexico in the United States. I think it was on or around the 4th of July 1947. And it made the headlines definitely in the regional newspapers, local newspapers. As you can see here, RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. And in addition, later that day, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. But of course, that was too concrete, shall we say, for the authorities. So soon enough, we were informed that it was all a mistake, it was all a misunderstanding, it was just a weather balloon, according to the officers. The army was called in to debunk the whole story, that there was a flying disc that had crashed. And this is really the beginning of a huge disinformation and misinformation campaign designed only to make sure that the people on Earth would remain in the dark about the origin and the purpose of the visitors from space. This would go much farther even than just this sort of getting control of the media and trying to control people's perception of what had happened. In Brazil, this person, he used the pseudonym Dino Kraspedon to write his book, which came out in Portuguese in Brazil before 1959, but this is the year when the English edition came out. And in his book he says, if man changes his heart and makes up his mind to be merciful and good, he will at once have countless brothers at his side to help him. This is what he was told by his space contacts. He was contacted by someone from space who landed in a flying saucer. He was not the only one. In America there was Orfeo Angelucci, who was contacted in 1952, and he was told, we ask that you look upon us simply as older brothers. We have advanced a bit further than you, but we're no gods, we're merely older brothers. George Adamski, I mentioned him already, and he's one of the most important figures in the field of ufology, because he was the first really to come out with his story. He was the first to come out into the open and tell anyone who wanted to hear it about it that he had been contacted by a person from Venus, of all places, who had come out of a flying disc that had landed in the California desert in 1952. And he wrote about that in the book Flying Saucers Have Landed, which consists of two parts. One is a historical overview with many references to biblical times and the Indian scriptures. That was written by Desmond Leslie, a well-known Anglo-Irish aristocrat and an eccentric of sorts. Very interesting man. And to that book, which was a book in itself really, was added George Adamski's report on his contact with a person from space that had happened in, I believe, November 1952. Here is the cover of his second book, Inside the Spaceships, that came out in 1955, in which he related his extensive exchanges with people on board flying saucers and, as they are called, motherships, huge flying craft from other planets which carry the smaller disks to other planets, including Earth, where they go on probe missions to or take protective measures in terms of the environment and things like that. He was told, or he wrote in his book, their appearance is in accordance with the universal plan of brotherhood. There it is again. They are brothers and sisters. They are not evil aliens. And of course, we must remember, this was the 1950s. It was the height of the Cold War, the ideological war between the United States and the Soviet Union then, vying for people's idealism. United States promoting freedom, Soviet Union promoting justice, and neither of which ideals, of course, being perfectly expressed because one cannot go without the other. They are not opposing ideas, they are complementary. But in the Cold War, the days after the Second World War, this was a geopolitical power game that brought the world to the brink of extinction through the invention of the atom bomb. And the space people, as the early contactees, among whom George Adamski have documented, have done a lot to protect the world from blowing itself up, in fact. So there was, against this historical background, there was a huge interest from the public in their information, the information coming from space through the early contactees. And I'll show you this photograph that was taken at one of George Adamski's lectures in 1954 in Detroit. And you can see the intent look in people's faces as they are listening to his story. And the massive audience. Of course, that got the authorities. This is this is about 7 years after the first sightings by Kenneth Arnold and the United Airlines pilots. And now the authorities really got worried. They wanted to control people's perception of the extraterrestrial presence, and especially the message of hope that they were bringing through the contactees, because it made people, of course, interested in solutions other than what our governments were presenting. The American government and their Western allies on the one hand, and the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Bloc on the other side. And they, in fact, began to bribe and intimidate contactees. The disinformation campaign started in the sense that people were ridiculed and maligned, and scientists were brought out telling the people that this was absolutely impossible, if not ridiculous. And only then did we begin to hear stories of abductions by aliens. Before that, from, say, the Second World War on, when we first heard about the Foo Fighters and when we heard about the flying saucers being sighted by pilots and crashing in the New Mexico desert, and all the stories of hope from the early contactees, nobody ever mentioned the word abduction or experiments, or all of the modern atrocities that you read about in conspiracies now, gene harvesting, crossbreeding, and whatnot. This only started after the authorities decided that the contactees and their message of hope were getting too much attention around the world. George Adamski went on several speaking tours, the first time in 1959. He was invited to as far afield as Australia, New Zealand, went around Europe, gave several lectures there. He was again invited to several European countries in 1961. And what the authorities wanted was to get a handle on the situation, make sure that at the very least the public would be confused. Okay, so there's all these positive stories that gave people hope for the future, that there is a way out of the eternal conflict, it seemed almost, after the Second World War, now the ideological war with the danger of nuclear weapons. I mean, I was born in 1957 myself, and I grew up in the 1960s, but I lived under that psychological threat of the Russians may be coming any minute. And I'm sure many of you have similar experiences. So there was this real tangible fear. And the governments apparently wanted to hold on to that. And they did everything in their power to confuse, at the very least, the public about the nature and the purpose of the extraterrestrial visitors. In Italy, a man who has been fairly unknown until now, until recently, there was Alberto Perego. He was a diplomat, and he wrote several books, 4 of which on UFOs. He documented all kinds of UFO sightings, newspaper reports about UFO sightings and related phenomena, not only in Italy, but also from other parts of the world. And as a diplomat, his role, of course, was controversial, because he was supposed to represent the Italian government, the Italian nation. But he was quite brave in the sense that he spoke quite openly about his feelings and experiences, not so much his experiences, but his ideas and his perception of the UFO phenomenon. Here he writes about the fact that the contact between Dino Kraspedon, the first contactee that I mentioned today, and George Adamski happened on exactly the same day in 2 different places. 20 November 1952, Dino Kraspedon was contacted in Brazil. George Adamski was contacted in the California desert. And they were given the same identical message. This is one of the books that Alberto Perego published. He had to publish it. He had to set up his own publishing company, not really company, but because nobody else would touch it. This book is from 1963, if I remember correctly, and he was quite open about his solid conviction that these contacts were real. And mind you, this was a diplomat, not just the next person. Here he is again. He was also the main contact in Italy for George Adamski. George Adamski set up in 1957, on the advice of his space contacts, what he called the Get Acquainted program. And the purpose of the Get Acquainted program was to not just to release information, messages coming from the space people to people who were interested in other countries through a network of national contacts who would translate the information coming from George Adamski and distributing it among the interested people in their own countries. But the underlying purpose was to foster friendship and understanding among the people, because this whole subject brought together people from all different walks of life, not only in America, but around the world. So the Get Acquainted program was set up to do that. But because George Adamski was ridiculed to no end, there's not many people who even remember that that program existed. I documented in my first book, which is only about George Adamski. But it's interesting because at the same time in Italy, the friendship group was started, Amicizia, Italian for friendship. And Alberto Perego was one of the main protagonists in that contact case, where hundreds of Italians, well, over 100 Italians, were having regular contacts with people from space who were living in underground and working in underground bases around Italy and in fact around Europe. There were other friendship groups in other European countries. And if you read the purpose, the underlying purpose of the Amicizia case, it is almost literally the same as the purpose of the Get Acquainted program that George Adamski set up.
Can I ask what language was used between the contactees and the people in space?
From the accounts that I am aware of, it depends really on the country where the contacts take place. Sometimes it's telepathy. Apparently when people have telepathic, some level of telepathic ability, but they also seem to have a kind of translator device that they can use, the space people. And sometimes they have lived among us for quite a long time and have learned the language. So that would be Italian in the case of the friendship case, but English in the case of the UK. Right. So the friendship case has only been known about, at least the scale and the scope of the friendship case has only been known about since in 2007 a book came out in Italian. No, I don't remember the Italian title, but in any case it was translated as Mass Contacts, and it came out in English in 2009, and a very interesting and inspiring documentary based on that book, or the part of that book that is about the Amicizia case, came out in 2010, Il Caso Amicizia. It has an Italian title, but it is available, it can be found online on YouTube with English audio, accessible for every English speaker. Very, very interesting. And the friendship case involved several, not just Alberto Perego as a diplomat, but several other high-profile Italians. And I mentioned a few here: Bruno Samosizia, Paolo Di Girolamo, Gaspare De Lama, and Bruno Ghibodi. Bruno Samosizia died in 2003, and it was just shortly before he died that he decided to share his story with the world. And his story, his account, forms the main part of the book Mass Contacts, as far as that deals with the Amicizia case. The first part of Mass Contacts is about a case in Spain, and the second part is about the Italian Amicizia case. Paolo Di Girolamo is still alive and has written his own book, but that hasn't been translated in English. Gaspare De Lama, a well-known painter and I believe also an art professor, not entirely sure, but in any case a painter, is still alive. And Bruno Ghibodi was a well-known aviation and science journalist who worked on a TV documentary in 1963. And he was interviewed in 1963 about the Amicizia case, but at the time it wasn't known that it was such a massive scale, such a case of massive contact. I've uncovered that interview and some articles that I've used as part of my research for my second book, expanding the information that we now have about the friendship case from the book Mass Contact. Here is a photograph, very rare photograph, because this is the only photograph of Bruno Ghibodi that I've been able to find. at his desk. And here is a photograph, one of many hundreds of a flying saucer that was taken by participants in the Italian friendship case. The documentary that I mentioned shows several others. And here is just, and it's very similar to photographs taken by George Adamski in California. One of the unique features in the books by Alberto Perego are photographs of the interior of a flying saucer. Because Perego was sort of shipped off to Belo Horizonte as a diplomat. He was sidelined, so to speak, isolated, and his books were never translated into English until I found these, and nobody could have stopped me from using these photographs in my book because they are such an important part of UFO history, and they are documentary evidence of real contact between people on Earth and the space people who have allowed people to enter their spaceship. The photograph is grainy, I'll give you that. I had to reproduce it from a rather poorly printed photographs in Alberto Perego's books. These are from a book from 1958. Not the best printing quality at the time. They were printed quite small, so I had to enlarge them. But they're fascinating. Here is another one, more of a slightly elevated view with a chair in front with a triangular backrest in front of a screen or a monitor or the table here. See if I can I go back? This table, apparently, according to the description in Alberto Perego's book, has on the globe on top of the table indicates the position of the flying disc relative to the planet, and then the tabletop apparently had an enlarged view of the flyover area. That's how the people who made the photographs describe the function. And here is this is where the table is here, and these are things that the description in the book says the use of these things is unknown. So these are quite unique photographs that have been unknown in the English-speaking world until now. Here are photographs also from Alberto Perego's books of an extraterrestrial pilot. I can't tell you if they are the same person or if they are three different people. They certainly are all dressed in the same way with some kind of uniform made of shiny fabric. And the description says that they have kind of a bracelet around, or sorry, something around their neck and around their arms, wearing dark glasses. And these were published actually in two different books, and they have never been seen together. They've certainly never been seen in the English-speaking world, but even in the Italian original books, they've never been published together. So this is a treat for you. I've brought them together from two different books. And again, they testify to the fact that what all the original contactees say, the people from space are our brothers and sisters. They are definitely the human like we are. Maybe not terrestrial humans, but humans from other planets. They have a trunk, they have a head, they have 4 limbs. And they're really not all that different from ourselves. Interestingly, the friendship case has branches in other parts of the world. Through the story of Bruno Samasitia, whose account formed the main part of mass contacts, as I've said, We already knew that there were other bases around Europe where extraterrestrials were doing very much the same thing as they did in England, in Italy, sorry, with hundreds of Italians. There are friendship activities now also known in South America, where Octavio Ortiz and his family have been running and are still running, I suppose, their own, what do you call that again in English? They have their own private radio station where they have private communications with other amateurs, radio amateurs. And at one point they overheard a distress call from a ship somewhere off the coast of Chile. And they were then asked to relay the distress call to the captaincy somewhere else where the ship couldn't get through to by one Alberto, who was the captain of the ship called Mytilus II. And that is how they got in contact with a mysterious community on the island, which strangely enough, but is known in Chile as Isla Friendship, an English name for an island in Chile. They have recorded hundreds of communications with the people on that island. The book about the case written by Mr. Ortiz unfortunately is also has not been translated into English. But I have for research for my book, I asked a friend who reads Spanish to go through it and get me some interesting quotes, which I've used in my book. There's one particularly interesting case to do with this friendship group. It involves Ernesto de la Fuente. I think he was not a broadcaster himself, but he was involved in the broadcasting industry as a technician or an engineer or something. And he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And he was somehow invited for treatment to Isla Friendship. And he was healed after 4 days. And within 10 days of his departure from where he lived, he returned home a healed man. His story was featured in a documentary that was made by the Chilean national TV. Quite interesting. Then there's also another friendship edition, one might say, in the book by Enrique Barrios, who's also Chilean. He's actually lived and traveled and worked around the South American continent for most of his life. He's still alive, he's still around. And all that he has said is that he had an experience in 1985, an experience involving a UFO. And he was asked to write about it and suggested that he write about it as if it was a children's story, or else everyone will think you're crazy or a liar. The book is very difficult to find in English. It's only been printed twice, I believe, but it's still available as a PDF online. So if you look for Ami, Child of the Stars, here's the title, you'll have a wonderful experience reading it. And I would recommend that everyone reads it, and then you read it to your children or to your grandchildren, because it has everything. It's a very thin, it's not a thick book at all. It's not a voluminous thing, but it's a wonderful story, and it has everything every person on Earth needs to know about life. Really. The contact, apparently, Barrios' contact said, when he asked for his name, he said, "Oh, you can call me amigo," which of course is Spanish for friend, and hence the main character in the book is called Ami. So we have the early contactees who have never talked about abduction. They've never said a negative word about their extraterrestrial contacts. And as to the purpose of the extraterrestrial visits, they've only been very positive. I've shown you here some of the later contactees who are very much in line with the story of the early contactees, in as far as they've not been tainted or contaminated with any of the disinformation that the governments are still putting out. But then we also have a growing number of dignitaries and officials who go on the record and who have only positive things to say. I've just put a few of them on this slide here to briefly mention them. I have a handout. It's not a handout, but it's something on display that you can read with quotations from 11 different people, all officials or dignitaries, testifying to the benign intentions of the space people. And here are a few of the main ones. Pope John the 23rd, who had an amazing experience. Apparently he had several experiences, but one amazing experience was related by one of his assistants. Happened in the summer of 1961 when he was in the garden with that assistant of his summer palace, summer residence, Castel Gandolfo in Italy. And they were going for a stroll in the garden of the Castel, and all of a sudden they saw this unusual craft flying overhead for a while until it landed at the far end of the garden. And they saw a being come out which looked very human according to the assistant's description, except for the glowing, the golden glow around his figure. They thought that it must be a celestial event because it was an unknown craft and this rather glowing figure came out. So they kneeled down, and at one point the Pope was beckoned over by the being. So the Pope got up, the assistant stayed put, and he relates how he saw the Pope communicate with the being from the flying disc for about 15 minutes. When the Pope came back, he said, the sons of God are everywhere. Sometimes we have difficulty recognizing our own brothers. Mind you, this is the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. Kirsan Ilyumzhinov, who was the president of the southern Russian state of Kalmykia from 1995 to 2005, had an amazing experience in 1997 that he has spoken about quite openly in radio interviews, television interviews. There was an interview, I believe, on Channel 4 in the UK. Very reliable, very credible, because there were 3 witnesses who came to pick him up in the morning because he was in Moscow at the time, in his apartment in Moscow. They came to pick him up to travel back to Kalmykia, their home state, and he wasn't to be found anywhere until his extraterrestrial hosts delivered him back home through his balcony door. It was on the top floor. His apartment was on the top floor of the building. And they wondered where he came from all of a sudden. They had been looking all over the apartment and were ready to launch a large-scale search effort. Paul Hellyer, former defense minister, former vice prime minister of Canada, he's come out in 2005 for the first time, saying that the UFOs, the flying saucers, are as real as our own airplanes, and he's been calling his own government and other governments to lift the veil of secrecy. And then Edgar Mitchell, who was the 6th man on the moon in the Apollo 14 mission. Astronauts are known for their rigorous training, not just physically but also psychologically, because they spend prolonged amounts of time in confined spaces with several people. So not the kind of person that you would expect to be unreliable or shaky in terms of psychology, psychological health. And he has said in so many words that they are here, the people from space, and they are not here to hurt us. Just a few examples, and there's many more in my book. And of course the question we should ask ourselves when we hear stories of abductions or that are trying to make us doubt the purpose, the intentions of the space people, we should ask ourselves, why, if they've been here for so long and there's documentation that they've been here for so long, why would they have waited until we had developed this destructive capability of nuclear weapons to conquer us? All these things, it doesn't add up. It just doesn't make sense. If you look at the misinformation and the disinformation that authorities have put out, it just doesn't add up with the evidence. There are, unfortunately, part of the disinformation campaign, as I write in my book, based on statements from others, is based on huge black budgets, as it's called, and many UFO researchers agree that there are black budgets in US government and UK government budgets that are not accounted for, that are not subject to public scrutiny. And many researchers seem to prefer fantasies about civilizations or breakaway societies on the moon or on Mars even, or Nazi descendants and things like that. But why would those black budgets not have been used to stage abduction experiences, hypnosis-induced or drug-induced, with props, very elaborate props, to confuse the public mind about the intentions of the space people? Add it all up, the evidence, and draw your own conclusions. But my conclusion, as I say in my book, is that their intentions are benign, because that fits in with what we know about the extraterrestrial presence and what we know about the experiences of people who have met them, and the experiences of people who are in the public eye, such as the dignitaries and the officials that I mentioned, and who have everything to lose in terms of public credibility by coming out with their stories. Why would they have waited to conquer until we had developed the ability to blow ourselves up? They waited because there is nothing to conquer. They're not here to conquer. I need to, oh goodness, time is flying. I was going to give you some background as to the physicality of flying saucers, and I'll try to do that then in a few brief minutes. Here are some photographs from a very interesting sighting in July 2010 over the city of Hangzhou in China, where we see a mothership very similar to the motherships that George Adamski describes in his books and that he has also made some photographs of. Here it seems to be departing, but these are all taken from different parts of different locations in the city. So a very different case to brush off as a hoax. Some media attention to the sighting. Here is another compilation of photographs of UFOs ranging from disc-shaped light appearances and cloud-shaped. It looks like they disguise themselves as a cloud, to luminous, very brilliant, luminous appearance over, what's it called again, that mountain in Japan? Mount Fuji, thank you. Here's another very clear disc-shaped thing, and this one almost seems translucent, or transparent almost. over crop circle formation in Holland. So they seem to be able to take on different shapes and different forms and different levels of physicality. And that has everything to do with the fact that according to the ageless wisdom teachings, which is the background from which I write, and members of the Theosophical Society will know through the teachings of Madame Blavatsky and perhaps Alice Bailey, that there are levels of material reality, physicality, above the gaseous. We know the dense physical, we know the liquid physical and the gaseous physical, but above that, according to the teachings, are 4 higher levels of physical reality, where the atoms simply vibrate at a higher frequency, because of which they elude our range of vision. They are beyond our range of vision. They're still material, but not visible to us. And I have I've documented that from several sources, which I'll just flip through now because we wouldn't have enough time to go through the whole thing. But one was Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who discovered what he called orgone energy. And he called it a universal life force that permeates everything. Semyon Kurlian developed a photography technology which enables us to record human auras, which are really the energies that make up our etheric bodies, which are the blueprint of our physical body. Rupert Sheldrake, a well-known biologist, English British biologist, came up with the hypothesis of morphogenetic fields, very much also very much the notion of a memory bank in nature from which all the physical forms in nature descend. He did an interesting experiment with African bullfrogs that I won't go into today. But just recently, Brian Appleyard in the Sunday Times wrote, "We are all surrounded." This was a review of Sheldrake's work. "We are all surrounded by as yet undetected fields which carry information from the past that forms new organisms." So all testimony to the existence of the higher planes of matter, which is documented in the teachings through some diagrams, where here we have these are the 7 planes of the solar system, and here we have the the cosmic physical plane with the dense physical, liquid physical, and gaseous physical, and the 4 higher physical planes, which I've enlarged here a little bit. So we have the dense, liquid, gaseous, and the 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st ether. And that is where life on the other planets is happening. That is where we find the cities and the people and the rivers and the animals on the other planets in our system. But because we can't see it with our limited scientific knowledge and technology, our scientists just brush it off, the whole idea of life on other planets in our solar system. There may be planets outside in other galaxies that harbor life according to their theories, but of course they are limited. Here is some evidence, very interesting evidence of craft existing on higher planes of physical reality. Here is a craft that appeared in a photograph after it was printed. The photographer didn't see it. Over a valley in Peru in 1989. And another one, quite similar in terms of how it appears on the photograph, over a crop circle formation in 1999. It doesn't stop there, though. While researching my book, I came across these video stills on a Spanish weblog where this was made by a lady called Monica Cole from Argentina. And she was on a hiking trip with some friends in the Ongamira region. And she was filming her friends from a slightly elevated position. The friends and she herself did not see these beings of light as she was filming or when they were walking there. This is an enlargement. Only when she came home and looked at the film, the video, did they see these beings apparently coming out of the ground, coming out of an exit of light in the ground. Again, testifying to the reality of underground bases and the fact that life doesn't depend on dense or solid physical forms for its expression. It may just as well express itself in etheric physical matter. So there we go. And interestingly, also escaping the attention of most UFO researchers, interestingly, there are descriptions of this kind of etheric reality in the books by the early contactees. George Adamski says there is no way of describing that light exactly, because the extraterrestrial craft do not exist in solid physical matter. They can flick a switch and then make the atoms of their ship, of their craft and their instruments and their bodies drop into our range of vision through lowering the rate of vibration. And they do that temporarily to make people aware of their presence or whatever. But they don't depend on that for their existence. But because they are not in solid physical matter, you cannot be taken up in your solid physical body into a ship like that. You have to be taken out of the body into your etheric body. You can be taken on board a flying saucer. And apparently that's what has happened. And most people are not even aware when that happens. There's an interesting description I found in one of George Adamski's books recently, where he's on board a Venusian mothership, I believe, and he's among a group of people from Venus, and they see him reach for his cigarettes in his pocket because they know him. They have been in contact with him several times throughout his life, in fact. And they see him reach for his cigarettes, and they say, "Oh, you can light up if you want." So when we are taken on board spaceships, we are taken on board in our etheric physical body with the counterparts of our physical clothes and the physical items in the pockets of our clothes. It was interesting to see that he actually was offered the opportunity to smoke if he wanted to. But several contactees write about how special it feels to be on board a spacecraft. Here's a description from Orfeo Angelucci, who says, "Seated in that chair, I felt suspended in air. As I leaned back and relaxed, that feeling of peace and well-being intensified." And that's no wonder, of course, when you're away from the bonds of the physical body. And here is a description from Giorgio Di Bitonto's book, another contactee from Italy. We found ourselves in a state of well-being which changed us and awakened all the sleeping powers within us. An energy that was more spiritual than physical. And an interesting addition to this type of description comes from an American scientist, Michael Wolfe, who wrote the book The Catchers of Heaven. He was a scientist in the service of US government, working for a number of years alongside extraterrestrial scientists in a laboratory in the United States. And he says about his experience on board a spaceship, we were standing in what seemed to me as a very familiar room, brilliantly lit, and the light seemed not to emanate from any single source but was everywhere. And so we have these descriptions from both early and later contactees. Now, most contactees, and I would suggest to you that these are the authentic, the genuine contactees, agree that the space people are here to help clean up pollution, nuclear pollution, which is worse, apparently, according to the information coming from Benjamin Graham, who speaks in the tradition of Madame Blavatsky and Alice Ann Bailey. And I'll talk a bit more about him in a minute. Benjamin Graham says that the pollution, the nuclear pollution, is worse on the etheric planes, because that is where our Geiger counters cannot measure what is happening. That's no wonder, because our scientists do not even know about the existence of the etheric planes of matter. And that is where they cause the most, where nuclear radiation causes the most damage, because it disintegrates our etheric vehicles, and therefore also the etheric counterparts of our brains. Hence the increased occurrence of Alzheimer's in ever younger people, because we have been spewing out this nuclear radiation since the discovery of atomic energy and its application in bombs and its setting off in nuclear tests and in nuclear power stations. And it's only gotten worse over time. And were it not for the endless efforts on the part of the space people, this planet would have been uninhabitable already, in terms of that our lifespan would have decreased dramatically. They're also here to diffuse political and military crises. Several descriptions of that in George Adamski's work and the books of other contactees, and confirmed also by Benjamin Graham. And they're here to share their knowledge and technology. One example of that sharing of technology is represented, one might say, in the beautiful crop circles, which occur in places where the energy lines in the magnetic grid of the planet, the electromagnetic grid, cross where there are vortices of energy. And they apparently strengthen that or reinforce that in a way, duplicate or replicating on the physical plane, even if it's etheric physical, the electromagnetic grid of the planet, which will form the foundation of the new technology of light, and that will give us all the energy we need for domestic use, for industrial use, for transportation, once humanity has abolished war as a means of resolving conflict. A bit more about that in a minute. Now, it's interesting that they are here now in such large numbers and apparently ever more visible. In 1958, Desmond Leslie, I mentioned him already. He was the co-author of George Adamski's first book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. He also wrote a novel called The Amazing Mr. Lutterworth. And in the finale of the novel, he writes about a space brother who inaugurates a time of splendor, as it's called in the book, by distributing the key to unlimited energy in front of the UN General Assembly. Interestingly, in 1962, Desmond Leslie acknowledged that the novel was in fact 75% non-fiction. And that's quite amazing when you read the book. It's still, it can still be found secondhand from time to time. And not only was it 75% non-fiction, but it was based on Adamski's mission of informing the world about the extraterrestrial presence and the purpose of their visits. Similarly, Canadian researcher for the Canadian government, a researcher into the presence of extraterrestrial craft, wrote in, I believe it was 1958, when certain events have transpired, we will be able to learn from them, the space people, and bring about the golden age. Leslie called it the time of splendor. He calls it the golden age, which all men everywhere desire deep within their hearts. Enrique Barrios writes, or has his character Ami, based on his experience in 1985, say the following: "You have already entered the age of Aquarius, but only in time, not in deed. The earth begins to be ruled by other kinds of laws and cosmic geological radiations. There is more love in people, but they still continue to follow principles that belong to earlier levels of evolution. And what occurs is a clash between what people feel internally and what they are obliged to do externally. And this will ring true with everyone who is still who is working, who is in a working situation in large organizations, where, and as a teacher, an educator, it is my daily experience that what you are required to do because of the system goes against your intuition and your nature as a teacher. And you know that what you're required to do actually undermines that which you're trying to do. We have Giorgio Di Bitonto, we just saw him a minute ago. No single event that have ever yet happened on earth can compare with that which stands before you now. You will be led by a new Moses, which we all love and admire greatly. This is what Di Bitonto was told by his space contacts. He will lead all the people on this new exodus like a good brother or father. These are all allusions to what the Ageless Wisdom calls the doctrine of the coming one, where every major religious tradition expects a new further revelation. The Jews are waiting for the Messiah, the Buddhists await the fifth Buddha, Maitreya Buddha, the Hindus are waiting for a new incarnation of Vishnu, the Muslims are waiting for the reappearance of the hidden Mahdi, and of course the Christians are waiting for the second coming of Christ. And these are all different expressions of the same universal doctrine of the coming one. And in yes, I would say in line with the work of Benjamin Graham, I suggest to you that that is the main reason why there are so many UFOs nowadays, and why they are here in ever greater number, in ever greater visibility. They are here in support of that momentous event in the history and the evolution of the human race, where we will be reunited with our own elder brothers. Because just as the evolution on other planets, several other planets, may have gone ahead of our evolution on Earth, resulting in spiritually advanced beings, as described by many of the, most of the early contactees and many of the later contactees. The same thing has happened here, except not on as large a scale. But out of the human kingdom has evolved a spiritual kingdom, our elder brothers and sisters, and they have apparently withdrawn during the time of the destruction of Atlantis, nearly 100,000 years ago. And they are now, they've always guided and inspired us from behind the scenes, but they are now ready to once more step out and make themselves known, make their existence known, and work openly among us in the world from the dawning of this new age of Aquarius, as it's been called. Benjamin Graham, in his it's not his latest book anymore, because I understand there's a new book, but this is quite recent, 2010. He has been saying ever since he started his public work in 1974, that all our systems are in crisis, and that competition and greed have brought the world to the brink. The only solution, of course, when greed and competition are the problems that have gotten us to the dangerous position where we are now, the only way out is their opposites, cooperation and sharing, which is the only way, he says, and the elder brothers of humanity say, is the only way to justice and freedom for all. Justice and freedom cannot be separated. They have to exist together and for everyone, or they don't exist. The rich may think that they are able to buy themselves freedom or justice, but if that depends on the bondage of other people or the poverty of the majority of humanity, then what kind of freedom is that? If you depend on something, they really go together, justice and freedom, and they have to apply for everyone, or they really do not exist. And the world teacher, he says, the master of all the masters of wisdom, the eldest of our brothers, are now emerging to inspire our correct choice in this time of transition. And we can see this in the world around us. We can see and read about it in the newspaper every day. I don't know if you follow the news, but there are some serious problems going on there with the euro, with unemployment, with austerity measures, with budget cuts. The old systems are not working anymore. And it's not just economics, the economy. It's not just finance. It's education as well. It's the environment. The crisis is, it seems, all omnipresent. It's everywhere, in every field of human activity. And our leaders are still hoping and trying to solve the problems according to the old solutions. We should give more space to the free markets, to the financial institutions, then the problems will solve themselves. Well, nothing of the kind, of course, because we can see the problems exacerbate and get worse as they continue. And what is so hopeful about this time is that we see all these people, real people, ordinary people, take to the streets, reclaiming their lives, reclaiming public spaces, hence the name Occupy, of the largest, the best known movement at the moment. But of course, we know that it started in December 2010 with the vegetable seller in Tunisia who set himself on fire after having been abused again, igniting the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring, contrary to what the media might want to lead you to believe, is far from over. It's still being fought by very brave people in Syria and Oman and other countries, still fighting for their freedom and still fighting for justice, still fighting to get rid of dictators. And yes, it's not as peaceful at the moment as it was apparently in Tunisia and Egypt, but the people are not afraid anymore. They are still going out in their thousands, even though their brothers and sisters are killed. And the interesting thing is that already in 1962, in an article, George Adamski said that about the changes that are happening in the world now, because it's not something that happens overnight, it's not something that happens over a span of 10 years. This has been happening over several decades. But already in 1962 he said that there will not only be geophysical disturbances, but also changes in society itself. And they will be of many shades and variations. And of course, Occupy Wall Street is one of the most prominent and most visible or at least evidence of change in that direction. We had, after the Arab Spring, we had the indignant movement in Southern Europe, and now we have the Occupy movement all over the world. I'm referring back to Benjamin Graham's master that he's been working with since 1959, who said recently that the uprising of the people is the voice of the new time, the time of justice and sharing, freedom and love. It is the voice of the people, and the people have awakened to their unity and power. And this will not go away, quite the opposite. This will lead us out of our present misery, will lead us out of the increasing crisis. And it augurs really well for the future, because that's where experiments in new forms and new structures and new ways of relating, new solutions to problems are created and cultivated. So we have a gathering of the forces of light. Mankind itself is awakening from our cosmic slumber. We have the masters of wisdom with the world teacher at their head, who stand ready to emerge once more into the public eye. Need I remind you of the allusions in Desmond Leslie's novel, in the description of Giorgio Di Bitonto and Wilbert Smith, and there are several others that I've used in my book, referred to in my book. Benjamin Graham's work is based on the teachings as they have come to us through Madame Blavatsky and Alice Bailey, but the same information has been coming from other sources as well, and that's what makes it so interesting to see that connection between the coming of the UFOs, of the flying saucers, the extraterrestrial presence, and the return into the world, everyday world of humanity's elder brothers, the masters of wisdom. Very soon, a face that by that time will be familiar will be on television sets all over the world at the same time. That will be the face of the world teacher. He will be asked to address humanity, and his presentation, his declaration will be about 15 to 20 minutes long, according to Benjamin Graham. And during his declaration, he will give us a brief historical overview of the spiritual heights from where we've come to the material denseness that we've descended into. He will apparently not speak, because we won't see his lips move, but we will hear his words inwardly through a direct telepathic rapport with every member of the human race older than 14 years, because when they're younger, they might be confused, they might not be able to understand what's going on. At the same time, when we hear his words, each in their own language, because it's telepathic, so you'll hear him in English, I'll hear him in Dutch, the Russians in Russian, and the Japanese in Japanese, etc., etc. His energy of love, he's the embodiment of the divine energy of love on this planet. Will pour out in such potency that he has said it will feel as if I physically embrace you. And thirdly, at the same time, there will be hundreds of thousands of miraculous healings, spontaneous healings around the world. And Benjamin Graham always says in his lectures and in his books that in those three ways we will know that that person, and only that individual, is the world teacher for the new age. And from then on will start the time of splendor, the golden age, as Wilbur Smith called it, the age of Aquarius, as it's been called by many others. And that age will be based on justice and freedom for all. So it is indeed a very momentous point in time for the human race. It's a shame that not more people are aware of it. But could there be a better reason for the presence of the brothers and sisters from other planets who are looking after us, who are trying to help us, inspire us to look after ourselves, to look after the planet? It is, I submit to you, the only viable reason for their presence in such numbers as they are here now. And so to round off, in my book, I have tried, and I think I succeeded in documenting the connection between the core of all religions, the ageless wisdom teaching, the shared wisdom tradition of humanity, and the messages from space, on the one hand, and the connection between the mass popular uprisings that we see now, the crisis that the world is in, the coming of the UFOs, and the return into the everyday world of the masters and the world teacher at the start, the dawn of the new age of Aquarius. Thank you very much.
I'm sure we've got lots lots of questions you'd like to ask Gerard? I don't know. Let's be first. I don't know. No? No questions? Yes, at the back.
Hi. If you see orbs, if you understand the expression orb,
Yes.
how do you know if it is an orb? Sometimes they're indoors, or whether it's something else. Not knowing what an orb is actually.
Yes, I would not be able to tell you. I do know from the UFO literature that the space people quite commonly use probes, as they call them, and they're little orb-like instruments that they are able to send out and control through their instruments or through their thoughts to do measurements or to listen into people's conversations or to record people's responses. I understand they're also used in the creation of crop circles. But I do not know if all the orbs that are seen or recorded on photographs are probes. I doubt it, because sometimes you see photographs with very many orbs. So I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to give you a definite answer on that.
Okay. Is there a lady there? No? Okay.
Some of the pictures of orbs I have seen have had human faces on them, and that was not put there by dodgery of the camera or the person who took the picture.
Yes, I've seen those photographs. Sometimes I think people are interpreting what they're seeing, but again, I really don't know if they are in any way related to the UFO phenomenon.
Yeah.
In the friendship case, is it known which planet the space birds came from in that particular case?
Not as far as I've read. I've read through Samasicia's account and Stefano Breccia, who is listed as the author of the book Mass Contacts, has added some information of his own, because he was also involved, even though at a later stage, in the contact with the extraterrestrials. And as I said, I've read earlier documentation, an interview with the journalist Bruno Gibodi, and nowhere that I remember do they mention the planets that they are from. I suggest to you that in accordance with the information coming from Benjamin Creme, that they are from planets within our own solar system. I also argue in my book that it wouldn't make much sense for extraterrestrials from other galaxies to come all the way over here when there are so many planets where human evolution has advanced so much beyond our own evolution, our own stage, that we can learn from so much for extraterrestrials from other galaxies to make the trip all the way. They may be coming here, but I'm sure they would not engage in contact with humans for the same purpose that people from Venus and Mars and Jupiter and Saturn are here. And again, no, I don't remember them mentioning, these contactees, the planets that they are from.
There was a gentleman called Sixto Palace came over some years ago who'd had an experience of going into a spacecraft, and he was shown where they lived on Ganymede. But he didn't know whether that was through the mind or whether they actually went there. But it turned out his friend said that he had only been gone 20 minutes, so it was obviously telepathic that he'd been shown this, how they lived, and that all the dwellings were rounded, there were no corners anywhere in the buildings.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah.
Have you come across Sixto Palace?
No, I haven't, I must say.
From Peru.
Mm-hmm. I've heard his name, yes. Yeah.
Something you might think is trivial, but I mean, I'm not a brother, I'm a sister. So I would love something a little bit more, a different word. It offends me just to have a brother there all the time. And you might think it's trivial, but it's part of being democratic and fair-minded.
Did you mention? I think you mentioned sisters.
Several times.
Actually,
Actually,
I mean, to put just brothers there, I find that offensive.
well, I'm
And
sorry.
they're always men, and I just want it a bit more balanced. I don't think it's funny.
I don't think it's funny, and I'm sorry if you feel offended, but the word men is used very often to designate men and women. Mankind refers to men and women. And yeah, again, I'm sorry if you feel offended. There's no offense meant, and
Really not advanced.
everyone is entitled to their own views. Yes.
Yeah. I've read before that the actual UFOs are not of a physical nature. That the people who actually fly with you, or whatever word, interlink their mind with the actual structure of whatever it is of the UFO. Do you know anything about that?
I know from Benjamin Cram's description that the flying saucers are actually operated through a combination of controls and interaction between the mind of the occupants and the craft. Unfortunately, I've never been taken on a craft. I've been suggesting the space people that perhaps they might take me on a trip. And I've also read other accounts of people saying very much the same thing. And in fact, I've documented from several sources very similar descriptions. And they even talk about, some people even talk about living matter, that the craft are made of living matter. So yes, it's in line with what I found.
Back in 1979, I was working as a night care assistant in a home in Bournemouth, and I was on night duty at about 5:30 in the morning, and I saw a UFO go over the houses nearby. I was so excited because, of course, I went and told people and they laughed. So, but my husband said, well, I believe you, but he said, I think that it's man-made, it's probably made on this earth. But I was watching it, it was very quiet. And then my husband and I had a chat, and he said, well, I've made a study of all these things. He listens to Brian Cox and all that. I'm going to say, you know Brian Cox?
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh,
Yes,
do.
yeah.
And he said it's impossible for any human to come from 450,000 light years, is it? I'm not very knowledgeable. To reach our Earth. He said it would just be impossible. So how would you explain this?
The way the space people themselves explain it is that time and space really do not exist on the higher etheric planes of matter. It is the reality in which we live in the 3 dimensions. But in the etheric, we're not bound by the same laws of physics and therefore time and space. And it's often just a few instances, maybe a second or a few seconds, for a craft to cover the distance between Venus and Earth, or between Saturn and Earth, or to cross the solar system. It's really, it obviously escapes my understanding, because I'm bound by the same laws as we all are, and I'm certainly not a trained physicist or a scientist for that matter. So this is what I understand from the descriptions that the contactees have received from their space contacts. And they some talk about bending time, bending space, but even that, I think, are attempts at describing what really goes on beyond the physical state.
Thank you. In your research, do you know how many people on this planet has the experience of this UFO or contactee?
No.
And who are they? What kind of people?
Yes. Well, I don't have composite numbers for you, but obviously there have been hundreds of thousands, probably even millions of people by now who have seen something. There are several here who have seen actual craft in the sky, not just unknown lights or undefinable lights, but actual craft ranging from saucers to motherships. People can see it on YouTube now, even though not everything is reliable, and there are people who are very clever at making videos that show something that were not actually recorded, but some recordings cannot be put down to hoaxes, and so they're available for everyone, even people who haven't had their own experience. So there must be millions of people. I mean, if we start from the 1940s, there must be at least hundreds of thousands, but perhaps millions who have had their own personal experiences. That's different from the contacts, yes. But apparently, according to all the different sources that I've gone through, there have been many more cases of contact between people on Earth and the space people than have come forward and told us about, especially because of the ridicule that befell the early contactees in the 1950s. Many people have never spoken out about their experiences precisely because they know what happened to people who did. And who are they? People like you and me, people from all walks of life, as I've shown, very common, ordinary people, up to and including dignitaries such as Pope John the 23rd.
So it's random?
No, it's not random. I think it's the space people who decide and who are able to gauge how open people are. They will say that they will never intend to scare people, even though through the unfamiliarity with the craft or people from the craft, people will be scared nonetheless, and then they will disappear or whatever and leave them in peace. But they could be anyone, but it's they usually have a certain purpose, and it's very nicely described in the book Ami, Child of the Stars, and I would recommend everyone to find the PDF on the internet to read that, where the space contact tells the author how they go about choosing people to appear to or not.
And you call those brothers, not a case of we and them. We all pretty much the same family.
We are a cosmic brotherhood, or a cosmic brother and sisterhood. And it's not for nothing that I dedicate my book to brothers and sisters everywhere.
Show people the
Oh yes.
symbol, the glyph.
This is the cosmic symbol that was given to George Adamski by his contacts from Venus. And in his description, apparently he used this for his Get Acquainted program. And in his description, he says that this part represents the male or masculine part of creation or humanity, and this the feminine or female part. There is a definite balance in male and female in the universe, and there's no bias, not even on the part of the creator, and that people use words to for convenience that are meant to include both aspects of creation does not signify any kind of bias.
I'm sure I've seen UFOs quite a few times. About 3.5 years ago, I was standing on my balcony, which was on the 3rd floor in Westbourne, which is not so you have the road, and then a 10-minute walk to go down to the beach if you're looking straight ahead. And I just looked up, and about the size of a 50p piece or a bit smaller, there was just this one gold light that just silent. Sort of went over and I thought, what's that? And then they came in threes, fives, and this went on for about 10 minutes. And someone who was in my flat saw it as well, my next door neighbour, but it was all like So,
Casual?
but yeah, and I mean, I phoned the police, they weren't interested at all, I suppose, because no one was being murdered. Would you have said that was UFOs, possibly?
Quite possibly. Of course, I have no way of telling or authenticating or confirming, but very often they appear like lights, and I think the best way to go about discerning between those lights that people light, tie balloons, or what are they called, and extraterrestrial. Sorry.
Lanterns.
Lanterns, yes, that's the word I was looking for. And extraterrestrial craft that appear as lights could they be confused with planes or helicopters or craft that we know about, is by observing their behavior. Are they making movements that our craft cannot do? Are they changing colors? Are they changing size, perhaps? So it's those things. When you look for those things, that should help you determine whether it's an actual sighting of something extraterrestrial.
Well, I tried to work it out in my head, each time I've seen something, whether it could be. But because they were so near to the roofs, I thought it couldn't be aircraft. I've got a feeling it was before the Chinese lanterns were popular, 3.5 years, 4 years ago.
Yes, yeah.
It just didn't seem, and because they were so near the trees as well,
Yes,
couldn't be
yeah.
anybody flying at night, or gliding or anything.
Yeah. The problem is, of course, that because of the disinformation campaign, many people, including UFO researchers or UFO enthusiasts, are so ready to dismiss sightings as misinterpretations or hoaxes when they're on video or things like that, just so they will be taken seriously. But I think in many cases they've been brushed aside, unjustified, just because people want to be taken seriously and not be confused with the first UFO enthusiast or whatever.
Okay. I would like to know, you said that they are here for helping, to help.
Yes, absolutely.
That is relaxing. They are not here to be invading with other thoughts. Because, well, we take Europe. We have been fighting for years and centuries. France against Germany,
Yeah.
Germany against Italy. So now we are having the euro, and we said, oh, good, what a nice idea. We are having the same coins. Now we have got this problem again that we are not succeeding in doing better. I wonder, are they really helping? Or just they said, oh my God, what can we do with these people living on Earth? It takes so slow to evolve, and there is something maybe that they are not happy about us.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a recorded interaction between the space people and the euro, but I do know what Benjamin Graham has said about this specific attempt on the part of the European Union countries, member states, to create an economic unity. And he has said that that is not part of the divine plan for humanity. It has been forced really on the people of Europe and sold as an idea for economic reasons, to make it easier for corporations to trade and get costly exchange rates out of the way, etc. And of course it's convenient for people. I personally always thought that it was, it had something when you cross the border from Amsterdam to Brussels, that you need different money, and if you go to other places, and I still need to do that when I come to England. The underlying motive for the creation of the euro currency was purely economic, and that is exactly the root of the problems that we find ourselves in. Everything has been given a price tag, including water. and before long it will be clean air. Everything if you work in a large organization, every single aspect of work has been analyzed and given a number or price, and it all needs to add up so that we make the maximum profit. And all in this race of competition towards bigger profits. And the profits, of course, benefit only the few, and ever fewer people. So that goes against what humanity needs. I don't think it has anything to do with the appearance of flying saucers in our skies that the euro isn't working. Those are mistakes that we've made and that we perpetuate, and thereby make our lives more difficult. As the longer we take to come to our senses, to get down to the nitty-gritty and decide and see that competition and greed do not work, the longer our problems will last. But at the same time, it seems that humanity is actually going quite fast, especially in this time, in realizing what is wrong. We may not be seeing that in our politics, in our leaders, in the solutions that they're putting forward, or even in the newspaper reports. But when you look around you, in the world, in your communities, and see the inspiration in young people and what they're trying to do, I think you'll find it quite amazing how fast humanity is moving away from, or a large part of humanity is moving away from the old ways of competition and greed. And I think we have every reason to be hopeful. And I'm sure the elder brothers of humanity and the space people, the space brothers, would not bother to come here if they thought it was a lost cause.
I just wanted to ask if you're maintaining that all the hundreds of thousands of UFO abduction cases throughout the world over many years now, many decades even, are all attributable to governments trying to throw a spanner in the works.
That's what started it, and then I think there's many impressionable people who feel that they have gone through, because of some trauma, gone through the same experience. And there's a lot of people who just are addicted to the attention. So in all, I think that comprises that group. I don't think there have been millions of recorded abductions, but...
Not millions, but very, very many.
Yes, and I think that none of them will be, in the end, will be shown to be attributable to extraterrestrial activity.
No.
But history will show the facts, no doubt. If you look at the evidence of coming from the early contactees and the message that they brought, how that ties in with the messages that we have been given from by our own teachers of humanity throughout the ages about the need for harmlessness in our relations. Do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. If you look at the fact that there were no abduction stories before the disinformation campaign started. If you look at the fact that none of the dignitaries and officials have never said anything about abductions. If you add up all those things, I think the facts are clear. That's my conclusion.
Just carry on that theme. You have already some sort of cooperation, like in Area 51 in the States, where there's backing engineering and progression technology between the American government and the ETs. What's your thoughts on that area?
Well, this is actually an established fact. Michael Wolfe, I was first made aware of the fact that extraterrestrials work alongside Earth scientists through the work of Benjamin Graham. He mentioned that in one of his books, and I was surprised to read that. But later on I learned about Michael Wolfe's work and book, The Catches of Heaven. He, of course, was asked to fictionalize his book, so add things that weren't real so that it could not be traced to real events, in order to get permission to publish it. But when you read his book alongside the accounts of early contactees and later contactees, then you can pick out the bits that others have experienced as well. And one of the things that he says is that he worked with alongside extraterrestrials. Later on, there was just recently, actually 2 years ago, Hong Kong researcher Neil Gold interviewed a French engineer, Philippe de la Messugère, and he knew Michael Wolfe. Michael Wolfe died, I think, in 2001 or something.
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Yes, yeah, the interview is on YouTube, yes. And this interview was from 2 years ago. And Mr. de la Messugère confirms that he actually was in a room with Michael Wolfe one time when 2 extraterrestrials walked in.
So that's that witness testimony.
Yes.
In the court of law, that would be
that would stand
acceptable.
Up. Yeah.
Stand up.
Yeah.
There's a photograph, isn't there?
Yes, with a reflection.
With reflection.
Yes. And there are, of course, the accounts in the mass contact book of Samasitia and some of his associates, who were invited into underground bases where extraterrestrials were working. Yeah, so it comes from different sources. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the best ways to go about verifying information, because there's so much confusion around. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, says there's more nonsense going around about UFOs and the extraterrestrial presence than actual knowledge. So I think what we need to do is check. When we have a piece of information, check that against other sources and see how it holds up. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The prosecutions talk of the White Brotherhood. Is that the same thing, or is it different?
The Great White Brotherhood is one of the names of the spiritual hierarchy of Masters of Wisdom. And yeah, it's one of the names, the spiritual kingdom, the kingdom of souls, all referring to that kingdom in nature above the human kingdom. As the teachings show us that we owe our physical form of expression to the animal kingdom that has come from the vegetable kingdom, that came from the mineral kingdom, and of course the expression of life through the evolution of consciousness didn't stop at the human kingdom. It continues. It always continues. It goes up into the expression on planetary level, the planetary logos, the solar logos, the galactic logos. It never ends. There is no end. It's a continuous expression of that life of consciousness. And the human stage is just one stage in that continuous process. The Great White Brotherhood, again, it has come out of the human kingdom, the Masters of Wisdom, and there are other stages above that. So yes, yeah.
June, and then take the lady back. June.
I can only speak from my own experience. But I've seen in my last 6 UFOs that no one on God's earth would tell me were not UFOs. And I've spoken to aeronautical people. They always were the same, the ones that I saw, but brighter lights. They didn't just, the word refract, they just attained their light. The first one I saw was in 1962, at an amazing speed across the sky and stopped dead. Absolutely, without any slowing down, and just hovered there, just didn't move for a sound, and then just took off. Just like that. And they've all been the same, and another one hovered above my house for about half an hour, and so much that it became boring, but there was no sound at all. It was the same white light, and then again. This ability to just change direction across the sky
No arcing, no slowing down, no other lights, no sound, always the same. And the other point when you were talking about sort of time, space, and travelling and all that, during meditation at one time I was sitting in a room and I had the image of a huge head come in front of me, and I travelled through that head, and it was like going through a filing cabinet, all the emotions and the knowledge of man, Suddenly I was on the outside of that round head, and it was as though I had my back to the earth, the symbolic earth there, and up to the right there were two stars, and suddenly I was mentally on one of those bright stars, and a voice said to me, to know it is to be there. A voice silent within my thinking, I might add, and ears in my ears. To know it is to be there. So I think that is another way of travelling. If you know a place, it's like remembering what you did yesterday, or if you went on your holidays, you can really weep in our own way to remember that. This was different.
The people from other planets who are obviously more advanced than we are, as well as the masters of wisdom on our planet who have come from Earth humanity, can travel by thought. Because they're not bound, again, they're not bound by the limitations of the physical world, the 3 dimensions.
So in other words, if you've been somewhere, you could go back there again like that, because you knew it, you could do it in your head.
I was thinking this lady, as she was speaking, you think of these people from outer space as superhuman, almost like heavenly bodies. It sort of almost links up to my mind with sort of a religious feeling about their powers.
They would certainly, and I've quoted some writers who were asked not to see the people from space as gods or demigods. They are, in many ways, more evolved, and they're certainly more technologically advanced, but as a natural process. And they are the ones that are more advanced. But at the same time, there are people in our solar system who are not as far evolved or advanced as humanity is. So it's a continuous stream of life, expression of life, that we're all traveling that path of evolution, and we haven't all started at the same time. We're not all traveling at the same pace, at the same speed, but it's all coming from the same source and going back to the same source, but with some kind of individual consciousness picked up on the way.
You don't think that they're here to save us from our own behaviour that's going to ruin us? We will go before the earth if we don't look out.
No, I don't think they're here to save us. They're here to help us save ourselves.
We can't save ourselves on our own and progress slowly.
Well, we are saving and will be saving ourselves with the help and the inspiration and guidance of our elder brothers, the masters of wisdom, and they wouldn't go through the trouble of coming back into the everyday world if they didn't think it was worth or the trouble, or if they thought it was a lost cause, as I said. So yes.
Yeah. I can accept that there are beings that are more highly evolved than human beings, and that they don't need to be in dense physical bodies. I think that's what you're saying. Isn't it? But then I don't understand why they live on a physical planet if they're not physical beings.
Well, obviously, the dense physical forms that we see are the precipitation on the dense physical plane of whatever blueprint there is, in this case a planet. But if you go to Mars, if we send our probes to Mars or to Venus, we don't find anything there, anything that we would call life. So apparently George Adamski says somewhere that all life depends, or there are no beings that just float in space anywhere. They're all connected to a planetary body, and planetary bodies are connected to the body of a solar system, so to speak. There is some kind of grand divine plan underlying it all, and I suppose the little lives depend on the big lives. There's some kind of dependency, and that goes into areas of of knowledge that where I would be out of my depth.
So they're not sort of in another dimension.
I suppose some people.
Three-dimensional.
Yeah, I suppose some people would refer to the etheric planes as different dimensions, but they're really just higher levels of the same matter, but on higher levels on higher frequency levels. Yeah.
I was watching a program the other day, and it's called The 2,000-Year-Old Computer, and it was all about a piece of technology, which you obviously know about. Is there any possibility that since you say that these people are more technically advanced than we are, because there doesn't appear to be any sort of explanation as to how a 2,000-year-old engineer could come up with something as complex and requiring such fine workmanship. So is there any link, do you think, between help that was received back in those times?
I wouldn't exclude the possibility, but we also need to remember that there have been times and civilizations on this planet that our historians, scientists are unaware of, where our technology was far more advanced than it is now. That would look like magic to us now. It was on a different turn of the spiral. The technology that we have now has been developed by humanity as such, by our own human scientists. In Atlantis, it was given to humanity by the philosopher kings of the time, the masters who were really overlooking and governing countries or kingdoms or etc. For the masses who had not yet developed individuality, a sense of individuality, and who had only embryonic mental capabilities. But the technology then, as a gift from the gods, you might say, and they could have been masters, but they could have also been a cooperation between masters and the visitors in those days. Yeah, so it could be either, it could be a combination. Yeah, there's so many things about our own history that we've lost sight of, but that will soon be restored to the shared human memory. I have no doubt. Maybe.
Thank you very much indeed. Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. I think you've successfully, I'm saying in your talk, you've integrated all the ancient ageless wisdom teachings, Adamski's teachings and other contactees. And I first came across Gerard's work through Share International, as I said, and also he has a website, Our Elder Brothers Return, which is an online reference library. And he also has a website.
My work as an author, yes.
And, yes,
yeah.
It's on there. So I'd like to really thank you coming all the way today. For absolutely excellent.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.